Hi, welcome to Steelfur Speaks. I'm joined by Andrew from Dice Commander today. Hey, Andrew, how's it going?
Going well. How are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm quite good. I've just come back from 3 week holiday in Japan, which was fantastic. But I've walked back into conference season at work, so yeah, it's a place to be. uh,
Does that mean you get to fly back to Japan for the world premiere for Mistvale?
I don't think that's going to be happening. I am going to Florida. That'll be fun. At the end of the month, I'm going to Orlando. Don't think going back to Japan so soon is possible.
You doing the Disney World thing?
No, I've got a conference all week.
Okay.
I don't even think I have. I might have a free afternoon, but I don't think I'll be able to make. We'll see. Plus, I'm more like a Harry Potter person. I feel like I'd go to like Universal Studios
Mm.
over
Mm.
Disney. Yeah, and of course, you've been traveling recently. You went to the Queenstown Invitational. How was
Hmm.
that? Was that good? I mean, it looked amazing from here.
Yeah, it was a phenomenal time. It's getting to meet all those folks in person from not just the LSS folks, but around the world. Folks you see online, got to see them in person. It was a phenomenal event, and then Heavy Hitters was just amazingly well received.
I mean,
Continues to be.
it's continued to be. I said to myself, I'm not buying any of these heroes in this set. I don't like the arena theme. And then, as I think I mentioned before, I bought into Olympia, having never played Warrior
Hmm.
before, just because I was like, this is cool. He's cool art, got a cool gameplay style. And now I'm terrified because Into the Mist, or part of the Mistveil, is coming out. Syria, which is Katsu, my classic
Hmm.
heroes. I'm like, can my wallet take 2 sets I like? I don't know. have you been
Just gotta.
Have you been playing any of the
I was
new Warriors, or have you been playing your old favorites?
Um, so Kasai, I haven't quite figured out how to get because I was a Kasai player, but the new Kasai player, I haven't quite figured out how to sequence her quite correctly. And I shouldn't say I know how to sequence her correctly. It's just not intuitive for me,
Yeah,
as it is like Quicksilver Prodigies, where I've been putting a lot of my effort right now. As it seems a little more, it's an easier flow for me to get my head around. So.
yeah, her ability is much more straightforward, and it gives you a very clear game pattern to follow. But there was a
Hmm.
Kasai in the top 8 at the Battle Hardened night, so
Hmm.
there should be videos, maybe a deck list there for.
Yeah, finding lists is easy. It's the again for me, it has to feel intuitive because when I'm several rounds in, you start to you want to you want someone who plays who you naturally think, right? Instead of having to try and stick yourself into a different play pattern. So.
Yeah, I got to look at your hand a bit.
Hmm.
So the topic of discussion for today, sparked by the recent release of Star Wars Unlimited, which I know I've bought some of. I think you might have bought a lot of, but it's you know new card game, but from an old card gaming company. And I mean, I don't know how many FFG games you've played. I can obviously see got that Legion in the background, and I
It
know
is
that
Legion.
your channel started off as playing Star Wars Destiny and X-Wing.
Hmm.
How many other FFG games have you played?
Well, if you want to go all the way back to the olden days, I used to play Disc Wars, and that was like
Ah,
late '90s.
okay. Yeah.
So.
So
Yeah.
yeah, a lot. And how are your feelings towards the towards FFG as a studio? Because I know I have mixed feelings towards. Um, and at this stage, I mean, how do you think about?
I think that their business, and to be clear, things may have changed post pandemic, but we use the expression here, stepping over a dollar to save a dime. And I feel that that's kind of how their company approached Star Wars Destiny, right?
Yeah,
And other games. They would rather not spend money than potentially make money, is kind of how it feels, which I think has led to the demise of a lot of their games.
it's definitely how I felt during the pandemic because you had like LSS going down the you can play online. Here's an online tournament is, and then you had games like Legend of the Five Rings, which was still just immediately before the pandemic having 200-300 person in-person events and could have survived if they had been supported with online tournaments and things like that. And the plug was just pulled, right? And the
Hmm.
entire OP team was killed. And I think Alex Watkins is now working for LSS as of recently. So, the talent is still kicking around the industry, but it very much does feel like when they run into trouble, they pivot away. Um,
Hmm.
And that's happened with a lot of their games. Some of it's been outside of their control with like the Warhammer license and stuff, which was pulled away from them. But some of it has been entirely, I think, within their control. But in some ways, I guess it does feel like their business model isn't to produce games forever, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not here for the 25-year Magic the Gathering slog, which goes through dips and good years and bad years. Would you agree?
Yeah, I don't know if that's intentional or not, though. It's a good observation. I don't know if it's intentional. I think one of the things so I think that they iterate on their games too fast in terms of mechanics, right?
Okay.
So like if you look at whether it be Legion, whether it be Destiny, whenever a new expansion came out, they introduced a new like huge mechanic or something like that. And I felt that FFG did that too fast. And then all of a sudden basically just like ran into this point where they either needed to create wild concepts that changed the game or power creep like rapidly.
And I think we'll get off FFG in a second and talk more broadly, but I think with FFG, the thing that always struck me is that they still feel like a board game company.
Mm-hmm.
They've got these really great designers who are great at designing an initial game. And then those designers, I think they like mechanics. So when they stay on the team, that's when you get this, oh, here's a new expansion, here's a new board game mechanic, like you get for board games, it's a box which adds another board to play on. And to maintain a TCG for the long term, you don't need that. You need like more stable designers who are happy playing in the playground that's established and balancing very, very well, which is a question. But their model does produce quite a lot of fun, right? And that's something that I guess when I bought into Star Wars Unlimited because there's a tournament happening in my area, and I think people play it. And I expect to be able to play it, I think, for about 3 to 5 years. I think I could probably buy into a few expansions, have a bit of fun with it 3 to 5 years. I had about 3 to 5 years of fun with Netrunner. I had about 3 to 5 years of fun with Legend of the Five Rings. And at the time when I was playing those games, I had this belief that this was my forever game, right? Especially with Legend of the Five Rings. I felt like this game could go on forever, when really the signs weren't there to support that theory. It had a very small design team of, I think, one person at one point. It was having shipping problems. It was having, fall off in new players, trouble with retaining new players. And I think that got to this question in the mind of how long should a game last? From release to when either the design team can't just keep iterating or it naturally falls off. And I guess that's a pretty big question. What are your thoughts in terms of like longevity of these games when they come out?
Yeah, so it used to be, this was, early 2000s or so. I had seen because I was working at an LGS at the time while I was going through school. And I'd seen an industry report that their expected shelf life of a new game at that time was roughly 3 years.
And do you think
so?
Well, that
yeah,
was
go ahead.
That was quite a while ago, so that was probably
right.
Do you think that's changed?
I think it's probably less now because it's the expected turnover and release rate of, it feels to me at least that the expected release rate of new expansions is higher than it was back then, right? Back then it used to be, it'd be okay to get 1 to 2, maybe 3 expansions a year. And now it feels like some games feel like it needs to be faster than that.
Do you think, so this is interesting because we're talking about fatigue in some ways. If you have to produce more products a year, then everything gets tired faster. The player's appetite to spend money gets tired. The design bank of ideas gets tired. The designers and the actual people working at the company get tired faster as well. So how much of that do you feel is just games are dying faster because fatigue is setting in quicker?
Well, I think fatigue's certainly a part of it. I think that's very insightful. I think it's a product, again, since we're using the report from the early 2000s, I think it's a product of how the internet has changed even paper games, in that, we have the whole set spoiled and people are playing them on Talishar before the game even releases. People have all this stuff figured out and they've already figured out the broken stuff, quote unquote, before stuff hits the shelves, right? So the turnaround time, because of how we can connect with each other and we don't have to meet at the game store, we can do it online. I think it decreases that kind of ramp time. And I think that leads to people wanting stuff faster because it already got figured out and they've got deck lists on day 2. And I do think, and that's why I think your fatigue statement is insightful, because I think that does lead to fatigue of maybe even the company. They're like, well, what do you mean everybody's saying our set's broken? Like, it's been out for 2 days, right? Figure it out, or something like that. So I think that's a real thing.
It's interesting that because when you the way you phrased it in terms of like the expectation of the consumer fueled by the internet, it's just immediately making me think about World of Warcraft. Now, I don't know if you've ever played World of Warcraft. I've obviously been playing classic World of Warcraft recently, and when you look back then, the raids that they released, you're talking about 2 to 3 months to clear them because people didn't know how to get the most DPS out of the character. They didn't know how to get, and the forums and things like that, the online tools to talk about those kind of things, or sim it, or do the calculations to figure that stuff out, didn't exist. And then you think about modern World of Warcraft, where first the set goes up live on the playtest realm, right? The best players in the world play it on the playtest realm. They're the people who test it because they are the best people who can test the challenging mechanics. And then finally, when the actual race comes out, we're talking about a week to clear the hardest content. So you go from 2004, lack of communication, lack of, data tools, data mining, simulations, more community, more local level of understanding metas and things. And then you move into 2024, where it's everyone's talking about everything. As you say, we've got it on Talishar, we've got the data behind the card.
Mm-hmm.
We know the optimal hypergeometric calculation for the number of blues in a Bravo deck, right? And there's that like kind of level of data means that we do go from release to solved much faster. Which is one of the reasons why Heavy Hitters, I think this meta specifically, is playing so well with the community, is that we haven't yet had a top deck. Like, I think it is probably Dromai, but the top 8 that just happened was very, very different from the last top 8. I think the Pro Tour, people still feel it's a bit of an open book.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really exciting. And I guess the point is that it's kind of hard to do that in this environment where there's so much data and so many games being played. It's hard to create that gem that doesn't get solved straight away.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, that's certain.
I was going to say, if players can't solve something straight away, often they assume it's a design mistake. I'm thinking about Prism, and how the designers have been criticized quite a lot for saying Prism's a puzzle you haven't solved yet. And then the best players are like, well, it's been 2 months, I've tried to solve it, I haven't solved it. You messed up by making it hard for me to.
Oh, you're talking Advent of Thrones or Awakener of Soul. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, just print a new better stick that lets angels go.
Yeah, I mean that was the solution, but the narrative from the designers was very much there is still a puzzle there. And the pushback from players was it's been too long, I haven't found it. So.
Do you think that's a flaw in, I know we're going a little off topic, but do you think that's a flaw in the thought process of maybe LSS design, in that they believe there is instead of serving up basically a buffet for the players, they're trying to serve them like a curated meal instead?
I wouldn't call that a flaw, because from my perspective, having tested various card games, I think you have to go in with an understanding of what the best deck is going to be, right? And if you think about something like Elphaba, which I did a lot of playtesting for back in the day, you'd have 2 or 3 sub-themes in a clan, but you'd have one theme that was going to be the competitive deck. And you could be like, well, if people want to play the monk version, it's not going to be as good, but if they play this version, it's very good. I think you have to test the strongest version of the deck and then help players to get there. Because that's the only way you could actually balance the game, right? Because if I don't know, it's kind of with Riptide. No one actually wants. People think they want a hero that does some weird, wacky thing that doesn't actually deliver power, but most players don't actually want that. They want to find an optimal deck that's actually going to win tournaments. So I don't think I'd call it a design flaw. I think.
Well, doesn't it leave you open though? Or it leaves you exposed to if you missed something. I should say it leaves you more exposed to if you missed something. Whereas if you're at if you leave it a lot more wide and open and let folks kind of figure it out on their own, then they can develop counters. But if you've developed, let's say, 4 specific decks, and then all of a sudden a Starvo comes out of nowhere or something, right? Maybe I shouldn't say Starvo because that gets people emotional. But
Well,
if you've designed 4 decks and a 5th one comes out, now you don't have a counter to that.
well, so I mean, Starvo is, as we say, it's an aberration because we know that COVID just came along and smacked their ability to playtest, and they, like everyone else, just didn't really figure out how to adjust to playtesting at home quickly. I mean, everyone was struggling. But I think in general, like what you've described is there is still room for that, and I think developers do leave space for that. I think that's good design, is to leave space for the fifth deck. But I think that at a base level, you need to be setting a power level for your game and then testing against that power level, right? And I think that if you want a really competitive TCG, which Fab obviously wants, you're going to have developers who are good enough to say, no, the meta triangle when Heavy Hitters comes out is going to be, Kasai, Dromai, KO, or something like. They have to be able to get to that level of thing, and they will still be surprised because Fab is a low rotation game. There's going to be weird interactions that come out of the woodwork, but you can't be that surprised because that's when things get really broken, and that's when you have to start banning cards. So I think you have to design with the best decks in mind.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, yeah. It is a bit of a tangent, but I think it is relevant because, when you're talking about kind of like player fatigue and solving mysteries and how that contributes to longevity of games, we have this notion that if the developers are designing specific decks and then hoping the players discover them, that means that sometimes those decks are going to be solved very rapidly. And sometimes people are going to get fed up like they did with Prism. So you have the two sort of opposing conditions. You've got the optimal ninja deck, which is just go again and, reasonably easy to build. There's some nuance there in terms of what matchups am I running, like Mask of the Pouncing Lynx into? Where am I trying to set up big turns versus throwing my hand at my opponent? And then you've got the Prisms, where it just doesn't materialize. And Ninja is not satisfying to some players because it's too straightforward. Prism wasn't satisfying to most of the existing Prism players because it was not there. And then the middle ground is where you've got your Kasai's, right, that you haven't solved yet, or, all the fun, really, which should last people a month or two, maybe, depending on whether it's a, competitive season where some people are just testing intensely, right? So I imagine after the Pro Tour, the Heavy Hitters meta, fairly, there's lots of macro testing is going to be coming out. But for me as a casual player, that Pro Tour is going to happen 2 months after release. And I'm having 2 months of fun not having a completely optimized armory meta where everyone's copied the Pro Tour deck. So that's kind of fun. And interestingly, not something that's happened in Fab a lot, because typically we've gone from set release to Pro Tour pretty quickly. That's a whole other topic.
Yeah, I mean, I do wonder if, because we're in RTN season, or I guess it's wrapping up right now.
Yeah.
But if we didn't have Pro Tour looming, you would probably have seen a lot more of the quote unquote big guns come out for RTN, right?
Yeah, vaguely. But one of the things that actually helped quite a lot was the ELO changes. So a lot of the big guns who are testing at home haven't felt the need to go to their local armories to win and spike, because on experience, those were the people who wouldn't have had a lot of experience because they don't play that often on in person. They play on Talishar, so they would have had to go to an RTN to bash it and get qualified for that. Because they didn't this time, they can actually keep a lot of their testing under the curtain. So I think you're absolutely right. I think people could be quite surprised with what.
Yeah. And then that will define our meta, right? Because everyone will jump on that, as you mentioned. So
exactly. But then I think that also starts the clock towards fatigue with heavy hitters. If I say this as a unique Fab problem, if the heavy hitters heroes are the ones that are winning, because actually what we're seeing a lot at the moment is fatigue with Kano. People are just getting fed up of him, and not any of the heavy hitters heroes, right? So it's kind of a unique problem because it's what heroes you're tired of is actually separated from that.
Yeah, the Kano thing's a whole another discussion, but Yeah. People don't like not having control, and especially in this game, people don't like not feeling like they have control of their destiny, right? And sometimes you just get KO'd.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I would summarize it exactly the same way as we came to play Flesh and Blood. There's no blue players in Flesh and Blood, right? Is what I like to say.
Mm-hmm.
And then Kano comes along and you're dead when you were trying to kill him, But so let's return, I guess, to the main topic of the episode then, in terms of fatigue in TCGs. So the process of what happens with a TCG when it starts to break down, right? It can come from multiple different directions. So either a set's bad and the players just get fed up with it. And if that happens 2-3 times in a row in the early lifespan of a game, that's talking about 9 months where people just stop showing up armories. And then when the locals stop showing up, the stores stop selling as many packs, the game just starts to wind down. Then you've got
Mm-hmm.
like the games that die because there's just a fundamental flaw. Most recently, I'm thinking about MetaZoo. Well, I have to, if you think about
Yeah,
games
yeah.
like the flaw was the designer's ego, the hype of the cards being led to overpricing, and then the next set not being as hyped, and therefore the boxes were them. Like there's loads of problems. You've got stuff like Genesis where the finances were wrong, right? And the game just collapsed because they spent all their money printing set 1. They had to do another Kickstarter for set 2, and then they spent all the money from the Kickstarter printing set 2 and paying off the debt from set 1, right? They just couldn't keep going. And then you've got the games where the design falls apart, right? So either it gets under resourced or key people leave, and the design just starts falling apart, which leads to the problem of, hey, this set's bad, I don't want to play.
Mm-hmm.
Or in one famous case with Alpha the TCG, the designers just decided after 20 years, no, thank you, we're done. And then they ended up selling the IP to someone else to build a game with. Because 20 years is quite a long time to run any card game. Right? So,
Mm-hmm.
And I think, do you agree with those like 3 broad categories? Like you've got design, player fatigue, and just back end shenanigans, we'll call it.
Yeah, mismanagement. Yeah.
Is there anything
Yeah.
else you think fits in there?
Well, there's the loss of IP, but that could fit under mismanagement. I mean, there have been many games through the last 20, 25 years that have died prematurely due to loss of IP.
And usually quite tragically. I mean, 40K Conquest, that was considered to be an excellent card game. Android Netrunner kind of died due to contract shenanigans. I'm trying to think. There's loads of other examples. But,
yeah, I played Babylon 5 card game back in the day, and they took the license away.
Show. I haven't seen their new thing that they're doing, but they're like doing a remake animated film.
I heard that, yeah, but
yeah, I mean, it could be good. I thought Babylon 5 was fantastic. So we can kind of put the games then into these different buckets in terms of how you'd put them at risk. Like Star Wars Unlimited is at the risk of FFG losing interest, design fatigue. I don't think player fatigue is as big of a risk because it is Star Wars. The game is pretty fundamentally well designed. Because it seems like unless something goes wrong or the design goes wrong or they have a massive shipping crisis, all the other things that have happened before at FFG, it could actually just go quite well. And then you've got, I guess, plenty of other TCGs have died recently, like, MetaZoo. There's lots of TCGs still coming up on Kickstarter that could have these issues. And then we've got Fab, who's sitting there at kind of the 5-year mark. It'll be 5 years in October this year. And what, if any, of these issues do we see applying to Fab? Big question.
Where is Flesh and Blood's risk is probably the largest risk. It feels to me the largest risk we've seen over the last 1 to 2 years is the Kickstarter stuff of people just going and chasing the new shiny, because Flesh and Blood is now established and it's not the new shiny anymore, right? We're the game you come back to after you get bored with the shiny.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that risk. So you think that something like Star Wars, people in the team to Star Wars, do you think that something like that actually presents a risk? Or actually, I guess Lorcana is probably a good example, I don't know about you, but my local Lorcana scene is on the same night as my Fab night, and they get 20, 30 players compared
Mhm.
to R8. And I don't definitely know that some of our players have gone to play Lorcana. Their partners will play it with them. Loads of
Mhm.
other reasons.
Yeah, Lorcana is a great example. So I was, this was maybe early December. I was coming back from Thanksgiving, taking a road trip, and I stopped in a place called Shreveport, Louisiana, and I stopped in the TCG or in the LSS, or sorry, the LCG.
Yeah, the LGS.
LGS. There we go. Jesus.
We're getting there. There's
Jeez.
too many damn acronyms in our industry.
Anyway, I stopped in and he was saying, the owner was saying that they're having an issue where their main Flesh and Blood players have started going over and playing Lorcana, or at least they had at the time, because there was just more EV, right? They could go make $20 worth of product in Lorcana, whereas, Bright Lights was out at the time and it was a very horrible EV set. They'd get their 2-3 packs and it would be worth a couple bucks. So that was the risk at the time. I don't think heavy hitters is as at risk for that. But again, and that's, you pop in and out based on the feed. But I think your Lorcana thing's spot on.
Well, Lorcana's an interesting one because their OP hasn't even really properly started yet, and it's scheduled to start this year. So there is a danger that we will lose. If they put up good pricing, we will lose some competitive and people in the community to Lorcana. I guess the question is how much of when we think about risks, we can put them in different levels of a setback, or we lose 10%, 20% of our players to Lorcana, and then there's like really big, like 50% of the player base disappears, and then you've got the existential, as in this is such a big threat, the game might not exist if Lorcana's. And I
Mm-hmm.
guess I don't put Lorcana in that existential risk. I put it in the minor risk actually. I think 10% of people going to play it, produce print runs for a year or so to deal with that, and then we create. What do you think? I mean,
I don't see Lorcana as being a direct threat. So I mean, Lorcana is not inherently designed to be a competitive game,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
To my knowledge, so I don't see them pulling from the same bucket. Um, I don't see it as being a threat.
I think the issue with the competitive thing is that if their tournaments are seen as soft and they're putting up a lot of product and the enchanteds are worth a lot, people will just go try and spike them. But I definitely agree. It's not a threat in terms of it's not suddenly going to suck away every play. But it,
Mm-hmm.
it may cause a bit of a dent in some local communities. I wouldn't be surprised if Lorcana OP starts stealing weekends.
Mm-hmm.
But
No, I think it could happen for sure.
if we talk about at risk, Lorcana is very much an at risk game, in terms of the things we talk. Player fatigue probably not at risk from that because they're enjoying it. Design wise, not exactly an unexplored space because copying a lot from Magic, but it is
Mm-hmm.
still kind of unexplored. IP wise, theoretically at risk if it doesn't meet Disney's margin expectations, and sort of just long term wise, if you think about the OP feels untested. Ravensburger OP is I've ever heard. I've criticized them in the past for all their box design and stuff not having shrink wrap on, you know,
Mm.
not having any sort of hollows on most expensive cards, like all these kind of things that should protect. So they've got all these kind of risk flags, which I feel don't apply to other games when we talk about longevity.
Yeah, I have to be honest. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a Lorcana player. I'm not into. I haven't bought any Lorcana packs, so I actually did. I can't believe they don't have shrink wrap on their
No,
box.
it
But
actually you can take packs out of the box while it's closed. It's that level of lack of protection. Yeah.
yeah, well, they're to your point earlier about being a board game company, they're a puzzle company, right?
Yep.
So
That's all I know them for, making puzzles. Um, and I think all of these things tend to kind of come together into an idea of how long these games are expected to last. I wouldn't be surprised if Lorcana year 3
mhm.
Disney IP company has the money and the time to learn from its lessons. If it does, if it doesn't, then I don't see it. Whereas controversially, I think Fab has probably learned from most of its lessons, by reaching year. Like on an episode, I think a few weeks ago, I said I don't actually see Fab dying, bar we'll call it like a big change. One of the design team, James White, decides he's had enough, and then the design starts drastically. I put those sorts of risks are there in the Fab world. I don't think next year they're going to print a bad set and it's going to fall.
Mm-hmm. No, I don't think. I think Flesh and Blood with their competitive model, like how they actually run their competitive OP, I think that in of itself is going to drive the primary discussion, almost independent of the design aspect. Where the design aspect will come in, I think, is their continued company growth and how much they attract the non-competitive players.
I think that's fair. PvE has been on the back burner, and that could. I mean, when it comes, it.
Yeah, and the social, well, the social is more of like your round the table type stuff, right? But your weekend warriors, I have no data on this, I want to be very clear, right? But I smell a very significant change in OP, like local OP coming, right? Like your armory level OP. It just seems to me that there's some sort of like change brewing.
Well,
in terms of making it more accessible.
They did say that they're planning on making most armory raffle rather than winner and stuff like that. So I think there are hints of what you're saying in terms of they want to make it so it's not just the person who comes in and wins.
Right.
XP, playmat, and everything. So that would be, I think that would be, it could be very good and healthy for the game.
I mean, they're going to have to, right? We have too many situations, not just in my community, but communities across the globe, where you have the one person who's won the cold foil, 19 copies of the cold foil that month.
Yeah.
Right. And they have no intention of stopping, and they don't care if the community is suffering or not. Right. They're after $20. So I think it needs to happen.
Yeah, I would agree. Now, in my community, if you've won it more than once, you tend to just give it to someone else. But I definitely know that there are some places where it happens. The person just goes and puts hard mark. He's usually a player and then gets beer money every. I guess so. We've talked a lot about Fab. We talked about other games, but here's kind of the crux point of the episode, really, which is that if Fab died tomorrow, we've kind of established it's not going to. I don't believe it is. You don't believe it is. But if it did, and you'd had, say, 4.5 years out of your initial Fab investment, would you be happy with the amount of time and fun you'd gotten from it?
I think so. I mean, when Star Wars Destiny died, I was disappointed and frustrated, but I didn't feel that I'd wasted my time or my money. And I think I'd feel the same way with Flesh and Blood, with the exception of, because all of this stuff's worth so much money right now, I'd be very unhappy that it was now a box of cardboard.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's a universal statement on any of these games. So
yeah, though dead TCGs aren't immediately worth nothing. I've got loads of Lord of the Rings around, somehow still managed to be worth something. But I get your point, right? There is that financial loss element. But it is interesting that you say, actually, no, 4 years would be a good amount of time based on the energy. And you mentioned Destiny, and I was thinking of Legend of the Five Rings. And maybe it's because of COVID, but I was very, very upset when Legend of the Five Rings died because I thought it had unrealized potential. Though looking back with like a year or two's difference from it, I am more grateful than regretful in terms of what I got from it and where it was going to go. And I think that's partly because I felt like design started to get a lot weaker in sort of year 4 and year 5. And I kind of felt like a lot of the areas of the game had been explored. So then when the game started to wrap up, I was kind of like, was upset. But now I'm like, I don't know if it would have gotten better if it had stayed alive for another 2 or 3.
Yeah, I mean, I never played that beyond just some intro games. I do have to say, I think that was a huge disappointment because they had they being FFG at the time had access to one of the most loyal fan bases in all of gaming.
Yeah.
And they still somehow messed it up.
Yeah, that is true. To put context to that, people don't know, Legend of the Five Rings was a huge deal. It was a TCG for 20 years. It's had 5 editions of its RPG. So when we talk about like one of the largest, most loyal thing, everything from cosplayers to massive dinners and meetups and huge tournaments. The launch event at Gen Con had, I think, 1,000 people showed up for the launch event of the new card game. And that wasn't really transferred then into Momentum. And of course, then the game was killed, and the 5th edition version has been a D&D modulation, and no one really knows what they're doing with the IP. I guess the point is that I still think I was happy with 4 to 5 years. And I think, kind of, because it's the topic of the episode, I think with any game that came out, if it was well designed for 4 to 5 years, I think I would be happy with it. In terms of my...
Yeah, do you think, though, because that was an LCG model, do you think that if it was a TCG model and you'd had to chase your cards and it took you longer to build your decks, do you think that would have changed your opinion?
That's a question. I think the amount you spend definitely, and the amount you spend definitely impacts how much you... As you say, if Fab was to die tomorrow and I have, EAs and things like that I didn't sell on time, I'd feel a lot more bitter. Whereas, how much did I really spend on Legend of the Five Rings? What, like £400 on cards I have over 5 years? So maybe that is a thing. Maybe I would be a lot more sad if a team. Yeah, interesting. But then that kind of raises the question of, because these TCGs do die. Is a TCG meant to last forever? Because if we invest in it, and people who've invested in early Magic are obviously doing very, very well. Is a TCG meant to last forever? Is that the only outcome of the model? There's either successful TCGs that are still alive, or there's unsuccessful TCGs that died, and any TCG that died is... Is that what we're... His collection is such a big part of it.
I think probably yes. Because, if you were going to start the Kickstarter thing aside, right? Because you and I've actually talked on Twitter about Kickstarters, so I'll try and avoid the Kickstarter thing. I don't think you start I don't think James White started his business saying, we're going to release 4 expansions and then I'm out.
Yeah.
And I do feel that there are games out there that do that. They're like, hey, I just need to get this to market and then we'll figure it out later, right? And that's kind of the Kickstarter thing, I think. But so I do think that it's maybe failure is a strong word, but I don't think it was successful because I don't think that they went in with the intent of having it only be released for 5 or 6 sets, right? Or 10 sets, is it maybe, whatever.
Yeah. But the question, I guess, is, do you feel like then there's something inherent about TCGs that mean they have to keep going? Because like a stock, if they don't keep going, the value just starts to disappear out of them. And then this promise of collectability instantly disappears.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that hits back to the interesting discussion around the LCG versus the TCG type model, right? I mean, if you buy, and even maybe we'll take card gaming out of it, board games, right? Yeah. You buy a board game and you're like, I have this and this is complete. They've got a couple expansions on the way, but if the expansions dry up, you don't necessarily feel that your game was a failure, right? But I think with the promise of an ever expanding card pool, especially when you have a game with rotation of a certain extent, living legend and all that, I think there is a promise of perpetuity on it.
So here's an interesting way of thinking about it. So, but say for example, Magic, right? Which is people have been making fun of Magic recently for designs. The latest one is, I don't know if you've seen it, but it's if you've committed a crime, and so that they take, the rule of read the card explains the card. That's not really true in Magic anymore because they're changing the way certain cards talk about themselves. So they've got this new, it's not a keyword, but it is an ability. It's like, if you've committed a crime, and committing a crime is doing anything that hurts your opponent, like making them discard a card or attacking one of their creatures. Okay. Right. So it's kind of a soft keyword. right? But a lot of people are making fun of it and have been making fun of Magic's keywords recently because they keep bringing back favorite old ones and not really making a lot of new headway, right? So if Magic was to stop, right? Be like, look, realistically, we've got a 25-year-old game. We don't know how to make more of it. We were going to stop and redesign. Or what if they just took the approach of we're going to start going back through the last 25 years and just re-releasing metas and things that we thought were good in the last 25 years? Or some other strategy to maintain the organized play and the gameplay ability for the next 10 years or something like that, but not actually making new cards. What do you think that
I see.
would do?
So just change their legality.
Yeah, exactly.
Effectively.
So
yeah.
just remixes.
I think that because Star Wars Destiny did that to a certain extent. It was taking them so long in between their releases that they would essentially just like do a whole rebalance and kind of like blow the meta up. So I do think that a subset of players would continue to play and be very active, especially if there's money on the line, right, from a competitive standpoint. But being able to go to your LGS and buy a pack is part of this culture, right? So I don't know that I don't know the answer to that, right? I mean, there's so many people who've been playing Magic for so long, I don't know that they can walk away from it.
Yeah.
But you're certainly not going to get growth.
Yeah, because it is the latest cool card that brings build a new deck or new commander. Or Fab's example, the latest hero. You know, someone sees Kasai when they're shop and they're like, damn. You know, it's just very interesting. It's interesting to think that we're involved in this hobby where if the game, like longevity is all that's keeping the game relevant and going, but it could end. And I think with a TCG, we're not actually happy with that limited lifespan. Whereas with other games, as we've said, like we would be happy with it. So what's the ideal lifespan for a card game? Well, if it's an LCG, 5 years is kind of okay. 5 years of 200-300 person tournaments is fine. And with the TCG, really, what we're saying is it can never be enough, because if it is, then you lose something when it leaves, as versus having a massive blowout tournament. Like, well, I'm glad.
Yeah, and I think the replayability portion of it is relevant as well, right? I mean, there are games to where I still have, and I've played, not frequently, but from time to time with people that are dead games.
Yeah.
I do question, and this is not because I don't like Fab, very clearly, right? But I do question how much, like if Fab were to die tomorrow, I don't know how many people would be playing Flesh and Blood in 5 years, is what I'm saying,
That is an interesting, because it is, for example, one of the card games I do play every now and then, trading card game, which has been dead now for. And I don't play.
That's the WotC one?
The Decipher one.
The Decipher one. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't play it. I don't play all the sets. There's 15 sets. The last 4 was severely underprinted and very hard to get. I play what's called the movie blocks. So that's the first 3 sets, Fellowship, the second 3 sets, 2 Towers, the third sets, Returning. And I do that because all of the characters are Lord of the Rings characters. And in the game, it's very thematic. You have to go through 9 sites, which represent places from the film. And if you get past the 9th site, you're considered to have. So it's a very thematic game. And if you're playing movie block, that journey starts in the Shire and finishes in Mount Doom. Or that's what the sites sort of represent. So you get this very thematic and evocative Lord of the Rings experience, which I go back to. And I, even during COVID, I played it a little. And the community is not huge, but still exists a bit. With Fab, I like the characters, but there is that question of, am I as attached enough to them to keep playing when there's nothing to play for? When it becomes work to get people to come down, when it becomes, instead of, we have, I think, 4 armories a week in London. And instead it will probably be like once a month, I get asked people to dust off them. It's interesting. I don't know if I would play as much, or if I'd probably be looking for a new shiny. To be honest, I'd probably be looking
Mm-hmm.
for something to play that's still being.
Yeah. And I don't think it's because, I mean, your point on how vested am I in the characters, essentially like the nostalgia argument, I think that's very solid in terms of the replayability. But I'm more thinking in terms of Flesh and Blood's complexity. In a winnowing community, it's going to be harder and harder to keep people plugged in to how plugged in you need to be good at your Flesh and Blood deck.
That's very
Right. So, will people be playing, if again, if Fab were to die tomorrow, would people pick up a dollar precon, a sale bin precon and jam them into each other? I think yes. I think the answer there is yes.
Yeah.
But are people going to be making Flesh, or how about this? Do we think that realistically there would be a continuing committee for Flesh and Blood? I don't think, with the way our community works, I don't think that anybody could agree long enough to organize that for longer than like 10 minutes.
I think they might surprise you. I think because I mean I've seen plenty of continuing committees. I'm the treasurer of one of them, and I think people would surprise you. But I think the complexity would be what shoots it in the foot, right? I think so, because I could see the way you would continue Fab, right, is you would kind of do it like a fighting game or like League of Legends. You'd have tournaments where there was a stable of heroes that were legal, and you'd name like 10 heroes. Say these are the heroes that are legal at this tournament, and then you'd either ban certain cards or remove certain cards from the heroes to try and make a fairly fun meta. But I genuinely think, because of the complexity of all of the heroes, out of card pools available, that would be a very difficult job for a volunteer to do, or even a team of volunteers. And I think that's where it comes in, because I think that would be a really fun idea. If you didn't have it wasn't like we're going to design new cards, because they probably want to do that as well. But it was more just like, this is the December pit fight tournament. Ninjas are legal, Guardians are legal. And that would just be it. Right? I think it could work. It could work as an ongoing rotational revisitation kind of thing. But would people enjoy that without new cards constantly coming in?
I don't know. I question whether they would.
I don't think they would.
And then you also have, in Flesh and Blood itself, and I know that this discussion is not strictly about Flesh and Blood, right? But in Flesh and Blood itself, you have the discussion, the argument of, if you were to go to a continuing committee, would it be Living Legend format? Would it be standard constructed format? I would have to think that if you're going to go like perpetual, you'd probably end up going LL format, and then you have the Starvo problem. And
I think the first thing any continuing committee would do would be ban half the cards that don't, But then
I mean, fair enough. Fair enough.
People hate that too, though. There is no win-win situation for keeping card games alive after they finish. I think that's probably one of the problems. I think with the way the TCG market is, and we think about the sort of players that get attracted to a game like this, when the competition's gone, when the prize money's gone, when the huge international events have gone, or more realistically, when those now belong to another card game, right? Because there is appetite for a TCG that you go to international events. One of Wizards of the Coast's biggest mistakes, say, the past 10 years, is thinking that attitude is, that has gone. Thinking that disappeared. They thought it disappeared. They thought people wanted to play online, so they started rolling back their in-person events, and LSS was able to dance through it. So if Fab dies and that comes back in a different form, and we're all suddenly playing, I don't know, I'm not even going to speculate what it would be, but I think that will be the main driver. Yeah. So I think...
And I mean, like you said, that is, I think, the primary drive to Flesh and Blood, more so than the fact that it's probably the best mechanically designed game out there right now. More so than all that, I do think it's the competitive scene that's driving it. And, again, we talked about casual players. The casual players are, they're going to want to buy new stuff, and they're also not going to be plugged in enough to even have a shot at picking the game up 5 years from its decline and playing with some person who's been playing Fab for 10 years, right? So
I think that's the biggest struggle, is that mean, new player adoption already a struggle because of how good people are at the game. You know, if a
Mhm.
new person comes to your armory, even if you're not playing the best deck that you could play, you're still going to have a lot of pitch stacking and all this stuff that just makes it hard for them. So,
Mhm.
you know, the idea that that longevity would exist after the game finishes, I think, yeah, the complexity makes it difficult. Whereas,
Mhm.
you know, if you are playing other games like Lord of the Rings, for example, you build a Hobbit tribal deck and you're going to play it because you're playing Frodo. Like, there's a lot of other
Mhm.
reasons to play the game. And
Right.
one of the reasons Commander is so popular is people are building commanders they like, you know, and it's not super cutthroat. Yeah, I think that kind of, I mean, on the subject of longevity, I think we've covered a lot of it. And I think the main deciding factor I think we've agreed on is that really how happy you are to wrap and close a chapter on a game
Mhm.
does depend on the amount of money you've spent, right? I think pretty open and shut in terms of our discussion. I think in terms of how long games last, it really just depends on how exposed. And a lot of the TCGs that are coming out are just massively exposed,
Mhm.
which is why most of them fail. And then I think we agreed kind of that Fab isn't exposed in the same way because it's gotten through that rough period. Um, how long more is it going to last for? That's a big question. Um, I don't know. I don't know if I even have an opinion. I said that in other videos that I think the main risk to Flesh and Blood is probably about 4 to 5 years down the line when James White gets tired. If he gets tired, he might make this his lifelong passion, right? But he has been running the company now and designing the game for apparently 12 years. So,
Mhm.
you know, when he hits year 20, is that going to be his, can I do this? And obviously, there's other designers and other playtesters and key members of the Fab team. When they start to rotate out, what happens to them? But I put that risk as like 4 years down the line. If they get through that, I don't know. You know, I don't know where the design of Fab goes. It's one of the things I find so exciting about it is that I don't necessarily see things that they see coming from left field in terms of new hero design. Like I didn't predict Dromai and Delusion Dragons coming at all. Um,
Mhm.
like I just didn't. I didn't really predict stuff like agility token, stuff like that from the latest set, or how good gold was when it finally hit our hands. So if they can keep doing that, 3 sets a year, 4 sets a year for the next 5 years, a good run. But when does that end? I guess that's the question.
Right. Well, and then, realistically ask yourself, I mean, you and I are different because we've been doing this for so long, right? But how long does a single player, how long can you stick with a competitive game
Yeah.
in the active sense? And again, we already talked about how Flesh and Blood can be the one you go back to. And I think that's fair and apt. But if, kind of maybe a sub theme to your question overall is how long should these games last and how happy are you if they last that long? Only matters if you're playing it the whole time.
True. Yeah, very true.
Because if you walk away and you're like, oh, well, I'll just keep my Dorinthia deck on the shelf, and then you come back and you're like, oh, it died, you're not going to be that disappointed that you have your Dorinthia deck on the shelf,
No.
right?
And you also might not have the appetite to dive into a new hero, right? But some of your warrior
Well,
cards
I meant if it
probably.
was dead. I meant if the game was dead.
Oh, the game was dead. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you wouldn't. So I guess it's all almost from that aspect. It's almost a self-solving problem, right?
Hmm. Yeah. I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure actually
Yeah.
on all of this. I think it's kind of a lot of pros and cons really, and lots of mixed things. It's hard to say what a good length of time for a game to last is because really, as long as you're having fun, it's okay. And then when it starts to go bad, you kind of just leave it.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe that's the answer. Then is like if a game starts to decline and you can kind of see it coming, and you're like, okay, probably this is 2 or 3 expansions left. Maybe that's a good way. Like, your relationship's going to end soon, but you stay together for a couple weeks, and then you're finally like, okay, this is no good, right?
Yeah.
Call it a day, shake hands and walk away, versus having like some sudden breakup where you just get dumped right away and you didn't see it coming. Maybe that's the difference in terms of your emotional.
Yeah, maybe for sure. I think if like Fab turned around tomorrow and said, "Hey, look, we're done," I'd probably feel like pretty put out. But if they said, "We feel like we've done everything we can mechanically, so the next set is going to be that," I'd probably be like, "Okay." And also, I'd hope that the company has made a living from making TCGs would have something else in the wings waiting for me. You know, like if LSS came out in 5 years' time and said, "Well, look, we think Fab is tired. We've been doing it for 10 years. Mechanically, it's done. The next set's the last set."
Mm-hmm.
And then came out and said, "But our new TCG set in the same world is," I'd probably be like, "Okay, cool. Let's go on for the ride." You know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's fair. I mean, now you're getting back into kind of the FFG model of kill something, or start something up a year and a half before you kill your next thing, right? But
that change,
it works for them. It works for them.
And I should also say that change gets us the innovation that has led to, I would say, better and better LCG. I thought L5R was probably a much better version of an LCG, and had learned from previous. So I mean that kind of rapid iteration isn't bad. I think Magic is tired at 25 years,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the reasons we like Fab so much is it's showing that time.
Yeah, the Magic thing's interesting, right? Someone had pointed out to me, they're like, the reason I don't play video, aside from nostalgia sense, they're like, I don't go back and play my video games from the late 90s because the mechanics are old.
Yeah. I'm one of those people. I can't do it. I went to play like original Zelda on my N64 I still had, and just the fact that I couldn't, it was something with one of the buttons. If I pushed a button to assign an item to the button, on the new game, it automatically switches whatever item is in a different slot into that slot if I'm swapping them around. But on the old one, it was manually select each item and put new, and I just couldn't do it. I was like, no. And that's how I feel when I play Magic. I can't. Lands just feel so wrong to me after playing games where they don't exist. I can't sit down and play. So, there is an argument, maybe that's one of the final takeaways, is there is an argument that TCG should die a bit more, or refresh, so that we can learn from the past, right? And actually, if Magic was designed now, would it still have a land system? Maybe not. Might end up actually just looking like Lorcana.
Yeah.
I think that's a thought. We'll just leave it on a thought. I think coming up to an hour, we don't really want to go on much longer than that, but this has been a really interesting discussion, and I know it's not been super conclusive in terms of we can be like, well, Fab should last for 10 years and then it should kill itself and, come back like a phoenix flame, something like that. But yeah, it's hard to say these kind of things, because how long should a game last? If you're having fun, it should keep going forever. But realistically, that doesn't happen.
Yeah. Well, thanks for this discussion. I agree. We didn't come to a conclusion, but so it goes. There's no answer.
There's
right?
no answer. No. Games either die or don't die, and whether it was a good thing or a bad thing is retrospective. But sometimes it's interesting to think about how long is worth the investment in terms of getting out. I think any game for less than a year, I'm upset with you. All right. Well, thank you for coming on the show. This has been a really great chat. And thank you for getting up. I know it's early your time. And I hope everyone has enjoyed this discussion. If you've enjoyed hearing from me and Andrew, do please let us know in the comments section, and let us know. We can maybe do more discussions like this if people really. Bye from me.
All right. See ya.